Hello, my quilting friends. Leah Day here with episode 24 of the podcast. And today I'm sharing an interview with Karlee Porter. She is an awesome quilt maker and the creator of a cool quilting style called Graffiti Quilting. So be looking forward to an interview with Karlee Porter coming up soon. Now, you probably noticed something a little different if you are watching this podcast on YouTube. I am filming the intro of this podcast now. The interview is still going to be just a single plain image, but on the YouTube version, I'm going to film myself doing the intro. So if you'd like to see me and see what I'm stitching and who I'm hanging out with, definitely check that out. Just look on YouTube and search for my name, Leah Day, and you'll be able to find it. So updates around the house this week. I am working on James's puff quilt right here. Puff quilts are really cool. Basically, kind of think of it as like little pillows that are each stuffed separately, and then they're filled up. What I did was I sewed this together and then I filled it up. So it's now really puffy. So basically this is a 2-inch thick quilt. And I did mine really differently than the way they're supposed to be done. And then now I'm sitting here stitching and kind of sealing up the holes that I have cut in the back of the quilt. And it's not a big deal because this still isn't quilted. I still need to sandwich it with some batting, and I'm thinking I'm going to use a minky back. And so there's still a lot of steps left to do in this quilt, but right now I'm just stitching these holes closed. And you'll be able to see a picture of this quilt on the show notes, so definitely check that out. This is a puff quilt for James, and how I made it was I kind of drew a picture of a Super Mario Brothers super mushroom, and then I laid it all out and decided on my fabric colors and created basically a giant mushroom quilt for my son. And he is really excited about it. I still haven't finished puffing all of the little spaces yet, and I need another bag of fiberfill. So it's been a lot of work, but you know, it's slow and steady, and James and I work together on it. I usually sit here on the couch in the evening. We turn on a show. Now we're on Flash. We're watching episodes of Flash together, and I put that on the iPad, and we just sit here and I stuffing into these puffs, and then now I'm stitching them, and he just sits and watches the show and enjoys spending the time with me. So it's been a fun thing. He's already saying, "Mom, that's my quilt. You don't get to use it." He's already saying stuff like that, and I'm like, dude, the amount of time that this has taken, we're sharing this quilt. This thing is half mine too. It's really heavy. I have it here on my lap. And it is surprisingly, well, I guess it shouldn't be surprising just how heavy it is, because each little square, and I think they're about 2.5-inch squares, each little square is filled with 5 grams of fiberfill each. And I actually have a little kitchen scale here next to me that I weigh it as I stuff it, so that way each one is filled the same amount, because I knew I have a tendency to kind of overdo things. So I knew if I didn't weigh the little puffs of fiberfill, that I would slowly be stuffing more and more with each little puff. By the end of it, I would be shoving so much into it, it would be like the edges would be way more puffed than the inside. So I know that about myself, so I just decided I would start from the beginning, use a scale, measure and weigh each puff so they're all consistently filled with 5 grams of fiberfill. I know that's a little obsessive compulsive, but hey, that's me. So as for some other news around the house, the last 3 days I have been working super hard on my book. That is the book on walking foot quilting. And basically it seems like every time I think, oh, okay, I'm nearly at the finish line, it's almost ready to go, then I open another chapter and realize just how unfinished it is and how much work is left to be done. And that's a little frustrating, but it's also something that I've just had to come to terms with and just decide to stop being stressed out about it and fearful. You know, I feel like I've confronted a lot of fears while working on this book. You know, and then also giving in to the stress of it, like, oh my gosh, there's so much left to do. instead looking at it as, well, I've got an hour. What can I knock out today? You know, what can I finish? And so over the weekend, I was really working on the final chapter. The last chapter is on finishing techniques, which, you know, I could probably bind a quilt with straight grain binding with my eyes closed. I've done it that many times. But drawing pictures of the binding process really takes some work. And I was lucky I had a little quilt that was unbound. It was a little heart and feather whole cloth. And it was halfway through the binding process and kind of shoved up in a closet. So I grabbed that and used it as a sample to help me make the diagrams, so the diagrams are accurate. You know, and I was just drawing the diagrams in Draw Plus, my drawing software, but breaking it down that way. You know, before I would just kind of mock up something with a photograph of a real quilt, and I wanted to do something different this time, so that way if I make these diagrams and I do a good job, I could use that same diagram again as a template and use it in future books and future patterns in all kinds of places. So it's beneficial to go in and have those images created. And it also taught me a lot more about the process and a lot of, you know, care of writing the whole binding process too. And I also, for the first time, I finally wrote down the instructions for curved binding. There is a curved edge quilt in this book. I feel a little crazy for putting it in there, but it's in there. And I had to finally write down the steps, and I kind of had to think through all of the steps and how I do that, how I cut binding, bias binding in particular is very different. And then how I put it together, how I use a lot of glue, you know, just stick it together, a lot of glue and a lot of starch. That's how my curved binding goes together. So that was an adventure, and it was not quick, nor was it easy, but I'm so happy that it's done. I'm so happy to be through with that section of the chapter, and I'm going to hand it off to Dad today. It's really interesting. Dad and Josh are two wonderful proofreaders, because Josh looks at the English. He was an English major, and he's able to correct all my grammar and mistakes that way. And Dad is much more technical minded, and he can look at my math and he can look at my diagrams and say, this doesn't make any sense, or I have no idea what you're trying to show here, or this is perfect, you know, whatever. Sorry. My kitty cat, you might hear her in the audio. Pickles has joined me this morning, and she's wanting either to be let out or she's wanting more food. She is quite a piggy cat, and she has this really long, whiny meow, so she might give you one here in a little bit. She's kind of circling around my legs and around the tripod that the camera's setting on, so she might get a little frisky here in a bit. So that's what I've been working on this week, just finishing up the book. This morning I started planning out the photos, and this is one of those things that's the difference between traditional published and self-published. When you are traditionally published, all you really need to do is think about the text and write the text of a book, and then you know, you are responsible for planning out some of the photos, certainly, and, you know, kind of shooting mock-up shots, but not at all responsible for major product photography and shooting pictures of all the quilts or even planning that. Well, as a self-publisher, I do have to think about that. And I also, this is the first book that I'm including quilt projects and quilting designs, and I'm wanting the book also to look very cohesive throughout, so that, you know, I don't have two really contrasting images on the same page, you know, so as you flip through it, it's a pleasure to look at. And, you know, I've never really put that much thought into a book before. I've never planned the photos in that way, and I haven't shot any of the photos yet. I've been working on the diagrams. Those are drawings. I have not shot any photos yet. And I am going to work with a professional photographer simply because the amount of time that it would take for me to get a good camera and learn how to use it and then learn the back end of editing and all that kind of stuff, I just don't have time. And I also honestly don't really have the desire to learn. I had to be honest with myself do I really want to add that to my skill set? And the answer is yes, eventually, but not right now, you know? And so hiring a photographer is a better move, at least for me. So what I'm doing is I'm kind of taking a look at the list of photos that I want in the book, planning out where those photos are going to go, and then making a whole list, and then figuring out what can be shot right now. I've got several of the quilts are kind of still in progress, and figuring out what can be shot right now, and then what needs to come later. So like finished images of the quilts, that's going to come later, but an in-progress shot, like a quilt on the machine, I can shoot that right now. And planning all that out is time-consuming, and it's one of those things that really gets my heart rate pumping. Like, it's the stuff that freaks me out. Like, oh my gosh, look at all this work I have to do, and it's so complicated, and it's so scary. And then this morning I was like, just organize it. You know, if it stays in a big jumbled up mess, it's going to be scary. It's going to be terrifying. But if I organize it, make lists, organize those lists, you know, organize it by the quilt in question. So, you know, Infinity Knot is a free quilt pattern that is in the book now. It was a pattern I gave away for free, but I took the pattern and vamped it up a little bit, added some borders, and of course added a gorgeous quilting design, and now it's going to be in this book. And it's still in progress, so I could get some really good shots of it on the machine if I stop quilting on it right now. So that's what I'm going to do. And plan it out. Make some lists, organize it all, and then find a photographer that has both, you know, the ability to come here and shoot good photos, kind of bring some lighting and that kind of thing, and then also has a studio where we can do some really good shots of the quilts and make sure that they're lit well. You know, there's a whole 9 yards of photography that I know nothing about, and I absolutely don't want to invest in the equipment because where would I put it? I'm running out of space, and I'm running out of time for more, you know, projects and crafts and skills. You know, like I said, I do want to learn that eventually, but not right this second. And, you know, I think that working with someone else, it gives them work, and that's win-win, you know, that's perfect. So that's what's been on the board with the book, and Josh and I beat around the idea of laying out the book, of, you know, having an editor. I have Janice Brewster from Creative Girlfriends Press do the editing, and we were beating around the idea of doing the layout ourselves, and ultimately I said no. I am ready to let this book go. I'm ready to have someone else take over it and get some work done on it. And that needs to not be me. And that needs to also not be Josh, because I've got a lot of work for him to do. I've got some videos and stuff for him to edit. Things like changing up the podcast and adding more video to the podcast is going to change things too. So, you know, our time is better spent doing what we're good at and hiring someone to do a great job at what they're good at. So Karen Silmetti, she works with Janice, and she's going to be doing the layout and helping me out with that. So I already have a date. I think that the book will be done by the middle of September, or maybe towards the end of September. I'm kind of flexible on that, but that is super, super exciting to not only know, you know, that Janice and Karen are going to do an excellent job on the book, but I already have the end in sight, and that's going to be here before you know it. Now for a few other projects that we're working on. I have been pretty jealous of Dad because he's been downstairs making wonky Christmas tree blocks all week. And these are super funky, super fun. And I wanted to make a lot of these. We had tons of fabric, number one, left over from making the wonky Christmas tree quilt last Christmas. And that's a free quilt pattern you can find at leahday.com. I think it's leahday.com/wonkychristmastree. So definitely check that out. But they're just really super cheerful trees, strip piecing, and then you just kind of angle and stitch on the background until it's big enough to be a block or a square or a rectangle. And then you just keep going. Add more, put them together. I did some kind of like curvy snow across the bottom for my quilt, and super, super cute. And when I created them, I knew I had tons of fabric and I would have tons of blocks left over. And I had the idea to maybe make even more quilts and give them away as gifts this Christmas. So that's what we're going to do. And, you know, I was kind of in a state with the book where I needed time to just focus on the book, which means that I needed to be able to give Dad something that he could work on for several days, and I just not have to really be actively, you know, coming up with calculations and stuff for him to work on, and coming up with fabric lists and new quilt patterns and stuff. So I was like, Dad, go downstairs and make some wonky Christmas trees. So he's been having fun with that. And I think we have over 25 to 30 now. So I'm going to be putting these together in lots of cheerful quilts and giving them away to family members for Christmas. So this is the first year I have ever done this. I mean, that might make me sound like a saint. It's absolutely not. I have never done this before. I have never managed to plan out Christmas presents in July and have them done by Christmas. I might have some ideas in July, and then I might start them in November and then have them nowhere near finished by Christmas. So that's pretty exciting, and it makes me feel good. And then I'm gonna use the quilts in videos on our Sit Down Quilting Sunday series. So that's, just in case you've never heard about it, that is a series that I do on the Grace Kunique long arm. And I have it set up as a set-down long arm, so it's still moving the quilt just like a regular home sewing machine, moving the quilt under the needle. And so every Sunday I shoot a video using my Grace Kunique and kind of talking about the differences between a long arm and a regular home sewing machine. So be looking forward to some wonky Christmas tree quilts. I'm thinking some like skinny wall hangings where the trees are kind of stacked up together with a little bit of curvy white fabric for snow in between. I think that'll be really cute. And then, you know, my aunts and actually, I'm going to send to my sisters and aunts on my side, and then Josh's aunts and his mom on his side. So everybody gets one, and they could be used either as like a skinny wall hanging, kind of like a little accent, or as a table runner. Yeah, either way, works fine. Another thing that I've been working on, I mentioned this in the last podcast, and that is some small art quilts. And I finally pushed myself to begin experimenting and playing around with these. And you can definitely check them out in the show notes for this podcast. Basically, they're trees. And I stitched these, this one with it. This is the silk, and it is a combination of silver and gray and brown and gold silk that I stitched onto a white background fabric and then satin stitched around it with black thread. And I was just using really small, like 3-inch by 5-inch scraps of silk that I had as samples from a silk supplier. And I just put it together and just kept layering the pieces to create the tree. And then the other one that I've created is made out of velvet. So it is green velvet scraps. I found the velvet scrap pack at QuiltCon, and it was like, oh yes, that's coming home with me. I didn't even need to see the price tag. I love playing with velvet. It is so super soft. It's just got this amazing texture. Now, these are mini art quilts. They are very small. So the velvet one is probably 8 inches wide. And I finally got a chance to create one of the quilt hangers that this is going to go on. I went out to the barn and grabbed a piece of cedar wood, and it started out about an inch an inch square by about 12 inches long or so, and I turned it. So this is a turned hanging rod for my little tree quilt, and the plan is to mix even more crafts with this. So I'm going to surround, once I quilt the trees, I'm going to surround them with leather and rivet the leather together. I love riveting leather, it's so much fun. And then I'm going to rivet the leather to my hanging rod, and then the actual hanger that hangs the whole thing up is going to be a beaded chain. So it's combining lots of different crafts, lots of different things that I know how to do. And what I love about it is it's kind of small chunks. It's a small little bit of that craft. It's not so much quilting or so much applique that I get bored. You know, it's not a big thing. It's not a huge turning project. It's just a little tiny stick that I nicely turned and made it kind of come in and get skinny at one point where the leather hanger is going to go. And then, you know, leather work is something that I've been enjoying doing, and having the opportunity to do more of it and then to mix it with quilting has a lot of fun too. So this has been a project that has been kind of in the back of my mind percolating, and I finally pushed myself to say, stop thinking about it, go actually do it, you know? Stop trying to beat it to death in your head. You got to actually go out to the barn and do some turning, and go and, you know, do some applique, pull out those scraps of velvet that you've had forever and play. Sometimes it's hard to play, you know? I don't know why it can sometimes feel like more effort. You know, sometimes having a whole plan, for me, it makes things so much easier. And working this way, working very freeform, is tough. And I admit, with these trees, I've kind of reached a stuck point where they're so pretty and so cute, and I don't want to mess them up. And I'm afraid to add more quilting to them, that I might mess them up. So I'm going to make several more. I think I'm going to go on ahead and make a total of 10 of these trees. So that way, I'm going to pick the one I like the least, and on that one, I will layer and baste and start the actual quilting process and picking designs and stuff. And that will hopefully unlock me about this whole thing. If I have lots more, I feel like they'll be a lot less precious. But because I only have 2, and they're so special and made out of such special fabrics, you know, it feels scary. And you know, I heard from a quilter just last night. She was having the exact same problem. She had this awesome t-shirt quilt that she was making for her daughter or her granddaughter, and she had this whole plan, and she'd been stitching it in the ditch, and then she wasn't sure about her free motion quilting skills, but she felt like her walking foot squills were okay, and it's like she needed permission from me to start quilting. So I sent her a text back on Facebook and said, you know, technically you already started quilting when you were stitching in the ditch. So you're already quilting, you know, going ahead and let go of that fear. But, you know, if you need my permission to get started, you have it. Like, go get started. Go start stitching on that thing. And I think that was helpful. Sometimes we need somebody to just kind of kick us in the pants and go, like, of course you know how to quilt that, Leah. Go quilt it. So I just need to get on the long arm. I'm going to thread it up with some brown thread and some blue thread, I think, and just play and give these a try, see how it goes. Even if I mess one up completely, it's not the end of the world. I still have way more scraps of velvet than I will ever use in my entire life, probably, and that's okay. So that's pretty much it for the updates around the house. The sponsor for the show this week is my website, where you can find a really awesome book on a super cool applique technique. It's called No Sewing Until You Quilt It. It was a book written by my friend Ann Holmes, and it has since gone out of print, so we only have a couple hundred copies left. So Ann is a friend of mine from Asheville, North Carolina, and she created this technique called No Sewing Until You Quilt It, and it's based off of her knowledge as a stained glass artist. And how she creates the quilts is layering the pieces over French fuse, a very lightweight fusible interfacing. It's so lightweight you cannot feel it in the finished quilt. And I still use French fuse for a lot of different things. In fact, actually, I use it as the background for my stained glass applique too. So you can check out Ann's book, which comes with a 1-yard pack of French fuse, at my website. Check it out at leahday.com/no-sew. So that's it for the updates and our sponsor for the show. Of course, if you have any questions about anything that I've mentioned here, or you'd like to get in touch or be on the show or recommend a friend to be on the show, I am always eager to make more quilting friends. So get in touch with me at leahday.com/contact. And now let's meet Karlee Porter and learn more about graffiti style quilting. Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and I am here with Karlee Porter.
Hello.
Now, a little introduction. Karlee is best known for her invention of the free motion quilting technique called graffiti quilting. In 2014, she published her first book on the topic and has since published a volume 2 that covers every element of graffiti quilting. She has traveled the world teaching this technique to places including England, Australia, Canada, as well as stateside. She is looking forward to teaching more and more, as well as developing her skills for quilting using modern technology, such as custom printing fabric with a large format printer. Wow, I'm so, there's so much there that I want to talk about with you today. So thank you so much for coming on this show, Karlee.
Yeah, thank you for asking me. I'm excited.
Excellent.
I could talk about this all day. So.
Me too. Definitely. So first, let's just go straight into graffiti quilting. This is how I know you. I started seeing these images, these beautiful, beautiful images of your quilts coming up a couple years ago. And then, of course, on my groups and stuff, people are always sharing different pictures of your quilts and your different videos and stuff. So tell me about graffiti quilting and how you came up with it and how it works.
Well, okay, so with graffiti quilting, when I first got into, the quilting industry, when I first started learning how to quilt in 2009, I didn't even know that, a long-arm quilting machine existed. My experience with quilting was, tying with yarn, right? In the living room with the big 2x4 frames, that's all I knew. But I had been an artist, for as long as I could remember. I remember at a very, very young age knowing that art or some sort of artistic atmosphere is what my career would be. I knew I loved art, but I didn't know how I would apply that to my life. And then when I started quilting, it just kind of made sense that all the art that I had been doing for the last 10 years prior to just transfer it from paper and pen to fabric and thread. And that's kind of how, essentially how graffiti quilting was born. Was I had learned how to free motion quilt, and I thought, I already know how to draw, so why don't I just quilt out the things that I've been drawing in my journals for years and years and years. So yeah, that's kind of how graffiti quilting was born, and it's interesting how it's kind of taken on its own life, especially with the word graffiti quilting being kind of when you think of graffiti, there's a lot of connotations behind it, some good and some bad, being against the rules, but also having your own style and your own signature, being very colorful, but also being non-traditional. Really, it's the furthest from non-traditional quilting that I can think of is in the span of all the quilting styles, graffiti quilting is the exact opposite of non-traditional. So, and I found that out very quickly when I started showing my graffiti quilting to very traditional quilters. So that was interesting to get their perspective on graffiti quilting, because it was the exact opposite of anything that they had seen in the industry. So that's kind of how graffiti quilting was born. And then I guess for anyone who doesn't really know what it is, if I could sum it up in a sentence, it would basically be the act of taking a ton of different designs and smashing them together into one quilt. So, which sounds kind of disgraceful or, haphazard, but it works. So I don't know. So when I started doing that, I just ran with it, and it seems to have been received well by the industry. So I'm just riding the wave and doing what I love, and luckily people seem to like it all right. So
excellent. Yeah. That's wonderful. Yeah. And what made you came up with the name?
Well, I grew up so I live in northern Utah, and the city that I grew up in is called Ogden. I don't know if anyone's heard of it. But it's kind of funny because it has kind of this weird reputation where the people who live there love it, but anyone who's never lived there kind of has this weird fear of it. It's a more gritty part of Utah, if that even exists. It's definitely not like Detroit or anything. It's not like LA or Philly, but for Utah, it was kind of the grungy, more ethnic part of the state. So I grew up around a lot of different cultural influences, like lowrider cars, listening to mariachi music on Sunday afternoons, break dancing, and graffiti. So when I was in high school, graffiti was a really big inspiration, and kind of where I took a lot of inspiration from in my own art was with graffiti. So I figured if I'm bringing something new to the quilting industry, but it's something that I've been doing for a long time, graffiti just made perfect sense. So that's why I called it that, because it just was my contribution to the industry, I guess.
Excellent. I think that's great.
Yeah.
So how do you plan the design? So I've seen graffiti quilting and I love it. I call it collage quilting, kind of the same thing, where it's taking lots of different designs.
Yeah.
So let's say, like, for an example, like a little cluster of paisley and a little cluster of McTavishing and a little cluster of feathers, and you quilt one and one of each of those, and they all kind of go together. So how do you plan it? When I look at it, it looks so perfect when you do it, but when I try it, it looks like a mess.
Well, so the nice thing about graffiti quilting, because I'm the kind of person, especially when I got into quilting, that I could never pick fabrics, I could never pick a pattern, because I had this trepidation that once I cut the fabric, if I did something wrong, everything was ruined. And so the nice thing with graffiti quilting is it allows me to just plan the bare bones to get started, because if I try to plan A, B, C, D, E, and F, those steps, I never start out of fear. So with graffiti quilting, I can plan out just enough of the quilt without having to say, like, okay, now I'm going to do this design, now I'm going to do this one, now I'm going to do this one. I can say, okay, I know what my colors are, and I know what the overall flow of the quilt is going to be. I'm just going to start. And then I can just enjoy each moment of my quilting experience, because I'm not constantly worried about step X when I'm only on step B. So I don't know if that answers your question, that I don't really plan out my quilts very much, only enough to actually hit the ground running. But I also like to think of graffiti quilting as having like a toolbox, that each one of these designs, when you can understand them on their own, it's really easy to start throwing them together and letting them mix and mingle with each other. So, I kind of just take my toolbox of designs to every new piece of fabric that I start quilting, and pull out one tool at a time, and then put it away when I'm done with it, and grab the next tool, and just kind of let the quilt tell me what design to do next. So I don't know, I like it because it gets me back to the experience of quilting without feeling like the monotony of quilting. That is so easy to fall into, when you pick a block and then you pick a design, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I just did a quilt with 90 blocks that I have to quilt the exact same design 90 times. Yes. So yeah, it's the procrastinator in me that loves graffiti quilting, because I don't have to plan anything too far ahead.
That's amazing. And so your quilts, they don't appear that way, at least to me. I'm looking at it going, wow, she must have had a list of all the designs listed out and planned where her color changes were and all this stuff. And I make it more complicated in my head just looking at it. And then now to know that you don't plan, that blows my mind. It totally does. I'm like, oh, okay, that adds a whole different element to it. So, wow. So what's your biggest tip? You're teaching this now. You're going and traveling and teaching. You've traveled around the world now. What's your biggest tip whenever you go and you stand in front of students that have maybe never quilted before? And how do you teach it?
So it's kind of almost like learning a new language. I remember when I first started getting into graffiti and starting to learn how to read graffiti, because someone who isn't experienced or isn't familiar with graffiti would look at it and not even realize that it's words, right? That every graffiti artist has their own style of writing, but it's writing. So when I teach a class on graffiti quilting, I kind of teach the students how to read the quilt. So, when you look at a graffiti quilting quilt without knowing how it was done, you're like, whoa, she's so amazing, which I love. You could keep on doing that. But my goal with my students is that by the time they finish the class, they can look at the exact same quilt and say, oh, I know why she did that there, or I know how she put that there and how it fits so perfectly. I know what she had to do to make everything line up. And it's almost like reading the quilt, being able to say oh, that's a cluster of pebbles. Oh, that's just a curl. Oh, that's just a paisley. Where beforehand, they were like, whoa, I can't even comprehend all of these different designs together. So, yeah, I think it's just like when I teach, the first thing I do is kind of like calm everyone down and say like, I know you think I'm amazing, but I'm going to let you in on the secret so that by the time you're done with the class, you can take your own graffiti quilting quilts and show your friends, and they'll be like, whoa, you're amazing. And you can be like, I know, because you know the secrets. So I don't know. It's kind of just dialing back and helping people understand the very simple shapes that we can use in so many different ways. And I like to think of each of those shapes as like a person at a party. The more people that you invite to a party, the more interesting it is. And one person is going to have a completely different interaction with someone else than a third person, you know? And so it's about helping the student understand how those designs can mix and mingle together into endless combinations, so that every single quilt you do is completely different and non-duplicatable. Like, people will ask me, oh, can you just make another one? And I'm like, no, I can't. I can't duplicate those interactions that those quilt designs have, just like you can't duplicate conversations at a party. So yeah, so it's really not as crazy as it looks, but it's nice that when you're done with the quilt, it looks crazy and awesome. So
totally, and ride with that, baby. You know, it's one of those things like when you can design something and make it look even more amazing, and it actually is pretty easy to quilt. I think that, you know, it feels like you're really doing the job right, you know, where it's like, wow, I'm getting so much more bang for my buck with this, and that's great.
Right.
So teaching classes on machine quilting, I've done it myself. I know it is challenging. It is a tough thing to do. So talk me through, what is your best teaching experience and what has been your worst teaching experience?
I don't know. You know, honestly, that's so hard, because when I first started teaching, I heard all of these horror stories, you know, like I heard other teachers talking about like the hijacker, like having someone in your class that likes to hijack the conversation. But maybe because I usually am the hijacker in conversations, I didn't really get that experience or I didn't notice it enough for it to be a bad experience. I would rather have lots of people talking than have people like blank-faced and not staring, or just staring at me. I don't know. And to try to pick a favorite or like the best teaching experience, I don't know if I could give you a specific, but I'm sure talking to a fellow teacher, it's that moment when they get it, you know, like that is so rewarding. And I know that's probably a cliche answer that all teachers say, like, oh, that's why I do it, when I see that light bulb go off. But it's cliche for a reason, because it's so true. To be able to take something that's so precious to you and share it with someone and have them receive it well is such an amazing feeling. So I don't know. And I think also having students who have been quilting for 10 years and then also having students who have been quilting for 10 days, and have both of those people leave the experience feeling good about their quilting skills is, you know, my whole job. I like to tell my students, like, if you feel like you got your money's worth out of me, then I am happy. Because I'm also a really cheap quilter. So if people spend money on me, I want to make sure that they feel like their money was well spent. Because if I'm spending money on people, I want to make sure my money's well spent. So I don't know. I wish I could pick out a specific, but I do have to say, being able to travel internationally is also, that was a huge blessing. That I never thought quilting would take me all over the world like it has, but I don't know. So I just am super blessed to have my passions be received well by people all over the world.
Absolutely. So. Yeah. And it's so surprising just how wonderfully interconnected, you know, and it's all the guilds. It is the history of quilting guilds and their foundation within the United States and then elsewhere, and their power to, you know, to help you travel and teach. It's an amazing thing. So I know you're expecting your first baby.
I sure am. Yeah. Baby number 1.
That's so exciting. So are you planning on slowing down the traveling and teaching? Like, is that going to change once she's born?
You know, well, I definitely am not trying to travel and teach with like a 6-month-old. So I don't have anything booked out pretty much for the rest of the year. But I don't want to count anything out. You know, I got a gig in Denver coming next March. So March of 2018. There's actually a guild in Norway that wants me to come in 2019. So I don't know. I'm definitely slowing down the quilting, or not the quilting, the teaching. But luckily, I feel like there's still ways that I can teach without ever leaving my house. So maybe I can do more online stuff where people can kind of come to me and come to my website and things like that, where I can still teach, but then, you know, snuggle my baby every night. So yeah, I don't know. It's a tough balance. You know, I know that you have kids. How has that affected your traveling and teaching?
Yeah, I've got a 10-year-old, so I'm 10 years ahead of you right now.
Yeah.
But I can say it was very it was like the second James was born, I became a different person. And so any thought that I had or expectations that I had before he was born just kind of flew out the window. It was like, you know, that was me as like the maiden, you know, like the kid. And then now I am the mom, the woman, and I am a totally different person with totally different priorities. And I, you know, and it was like I was in a different body even too. And so, yeah, my priorities instantly changed, and my focus because of that has always been online, simply because I don't have to travel. I don't have to leave my baby, you know, even though he's 10, I still don't want to leave him. So, you know, and I think that's, everybody's going to be different with that. So, you know, don't feel like, oh my gosh, that's going to change everything. You could very well still love to travel and teach even with a baby, you know. I think that that's the wonderful thing about quilting, is that so many women are in it and we all understand. We've all been through it, you know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that definitely is a great consolation, is women to women for the most part, that they get where you're coming from, you know. So yeah, I remember last year when we first got pregnant, or like right beforehand, I actually did in vitro fertilization. And I remember having gigs booked that I was like, oh crap, now I can't travel because of medical reasons. And it was nice to have people supportive that were like, you know what, we wanted you, but hopefully in the future you can come, you know. So yeah, I think that's definitely nice, especially with kind of the weird turmoil that the quilting industry seems to be on this roller coaster of. It's nice to remember that there's people out there that support, and, you know, we still love each other and support each other's passions.
Absolutely. So, I think the fundamental underlying core of the quilting world is still a wonderful thing, you know? There's just been some kind of, a lot of stuff kind of underneath it all that's not been all that pleasant, but I do think that for the most part, this is wonderful people making beautiful things, you know? So, and let's talk about classes. I know you've just started an online class for Shimmering Symphony. That's one of your most famous quilts, right?
Yeah. So I remember people, like, when they would see that quilt, they would say, like, oh, are you going to come teach here? Or, like, are you going to come to this quilt show? And I'm like, I just can't travel around. I don't know how those teachers who do show after show after show don't go crazy, like clinically insane from all that traveling, because I love to travel, but I'm also a homebody. But yeah, so when people saw this quilt, I just got so many questions about it, and I thought, you know what, I could totally teach like a whole master class on this quilt. It had so many skill builders in it for me, because I had only been quilting a couple of years when I made the quilt. And so, yeah, I actually taught a 4-week online masterclass based on the quilt, where it was like a live video every Saturday for 4 weeks, where I basically told them everything to do to make the same quilt. So we started with the pattern, putting the pattern together, marking the fabric, getting your supplies, picking your batting, all of these things that I went through when I made the quilt. I taught them how to do it. And it actually worked out really well. There was about 35 people that signed up, and it was just a private Facebook group. And the class technically ended at the end of April, but we're all still working on our quilts and posting pictures and things like that. So I'm really optimistic with the online presence of being able to take and teach quilting classes, because that one turned out so well. So yeah, so hopefully in the future I can do the same kind of platform, but with graffiti quilting or with other quilting projects, that, you know, if people like the quilt that I made, I can show them start to finish how to do it on their own. So yeah, it actually worked out really well. It was a fun class, and you know, it was nice to see students interacting with each other and posting pictures. And that class is actually how the woman from Norway is asking me to teach in 2019. She was one of my students. So I don't know. Technology just is amazing. It's amazing to me that we can be friends with people across the world and make those connections and, you know, share our talents on such a huge scale. It blows my mind. I'm such a techie geek, and my husband is such a techie geek that we just like fangirl over how amazing technology is. So.
It is. It's wonderful. And did you save those live videos? Or are you gonna open the class up again and play them again? Or was this kind of a one-shot deal?
Well, I really liked that with the live videos, it was really on the spot and people could ask questions. And so I think if I do the class again, I will actually make the quilt again like I did this time. Just because I liked that I could be in the process with them, like that I could remake the quilt and learn those new things that I didn't know back in 2012. And I also I want my students to realize that I don't just want to be a cookie cutter, here's all the information, now go decipher it sort of teacher. Like, I want them to recognize that I really am live. So I think if I teach that specific class again, I'm going to do every video live just like I did for the first class, because I think they deserve it. You know, I don't want to, I don't know. I think that's such a tough line as a teacher, because especially I found with teaching online, there's kind of two markets of quilters. There's people who want to pay the $10 to $15 and just get the 2 hours of information. And then there's others who really do want to support your work and do want you to be successful financially, but also they want that kind of intimate relationship where they can write you and you'll write them back, and they can post their pictures and you can give them that very specific feedback on their, you know, I wanted it to feel as much like a face-to-face in-person class as I could. And so that's why I chose to do, it was like a 2.5 hour live video every week where I was responding to their comments live. So I don't know. I think that's tough, because there's definitely different types of students, but I also would like to be able to keep paying my bills. And if that means putting forth more effort as a teacher, like, I would rather do that, because I enjoy that effort anyways. So I don't know. I like the live videos because I don't want people to think that I would just cut corners and kind of, you know, just throw information at them. I really like the relationships that I get out of teaching, and so I try to personify that, even if it's from screen to screen instead of face to face.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, and I understand how that's working. You know, I do something kind of different. I do more of the, like, chuck the information at you, as in, like, I make the video and teach the thing and break it down into sizable chunks. And it's kind of like, the way I feel about it is like, well, the method that I use for prepping fabric is not going to change between now and in 6 months. I prep the fabric the same way no matter what. But, you know, so one idea, and this is just a suggestion, is you have your core video of, like, the step-by-step how-to, but then you schedule the live Q&As, and that way, this is only just me extrapolating, that way you have, you know, the core content already done, and you don't have to redo it again, and then you are still there to do the interaction with your students. And, you know, the way I look at it is, to survive in the quilting world, we've got to figure out, that profit, cost, time, all that balance. And anything that I can do one time and get paid for it, for months or years, that is worth so much more to me than something that I do once and sell it once and then it's gone,
Right, for sure. Well, and that's the nice thing about when I taught the classes, I have had a YouTube channel for a few years now, and it was nice for some of the specific techniques within the overall project. I could post videos and say, like, hey, here's a YouTube video, watch it, and then let's talk about it. So, yeah, I totally get that, and it's such a balance, I think, as well as a professional in the industry, that you find, those ways that you can streamline your process and still make that income without giving up your genuineness, so to speak, that you can still have those interactions and stuff like that. So, yeah, I think it's so fun. And I think especially coming up with kind of your class curriculum, it's such a eye-opening process that is kind of, for me, still kind of evolving, still trying to decide how accessible I want to be, because I want to be there for students, but I also can't afford to spend 7 hours a day replying to comments for people that paid for a class once 5 years ago,
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's interesting, but yeah, I think it's amazing what technology can do and how it can evolve and how we can use it as professionals to find our real audience, and I think for me, I just hope that my audience will continue to be people who recognize that I bring value, but also recognize that it takes money and time to be able to bring that value, and they're willing to pay it.
Yeah.
And luckily I've had a really good experience with my followers that they recognize that, that diapers are expensive and in vitro was expensive, but at the end of the day, they recognize that if I want to keep doing what I'm doing, that there's a great partnership there. So I hope to never lose that, because I think that's so valuable within any creative industry, recognizing people's value and really kind of putting your money where your mouth is, because I think it's so easy as makers to be taken advantage of and to be devalued, and for people to say like, oh, well, you love what you do, why should you make money? You already enjoy it, so that's payment enough. Or
loving it doesn't pay the electric bill.
Right. We hear all of that. We can't really pay our mortgage in kind compliments as much as I would love to.
Exactly. And that is one of the reasons why I don't sell finished quilts.
Right.
I don't know if you have ever done this or not, but I never sell a finished quilt. If I'm going to give something away, give it away. But I would never sell that, because to me that's a one-time transaction. It's done, it's gone, and then it's gone. I could sell the quilt pattern 1,000,000 times, but I can't sell. I can only sell that quilt once, and because of that, careful. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the most common things that I get from people who are not familiar with quilting. Is I say, oh yeah, I'm a quilter, and they say, oh, so you sell blankets? And I'm like, well, technically I could sell a quilt to somebody. Like, I'm totally open to selling my work, like my finished pieces. I would rather have someone enjoy it and love it than have it sit in a trunk forever, but I definitely don't rely on selling quilts as my main income for that exact reason. It takes so much energy to educate people on what a quilt is worth financially, that by the time you end up explaining it to them, they're like, oh, I definitely can't afford a handmade quilt. Wow, I'm really lucky that my grandma made me one for free. So, exactly. Yeah, that's so tough. And any art form, I think, is the same way. You have to find your audience that's going to respect the financial value of what it means to be a maker and a creator.
Yeah, so, I heard this, this was an article a long time ago, and that is, if you find your 1,000 true fans, then you pretty much got it, because your 1,000 true fans will love you so much that they will support whatever you do. So you put up something for sale, they're going to be the first person to buy it. You know, you put up a workshop, they're going to join in, you know, and I think when you start looking at that, that number can be really intimidating. It can be scary, but then at the same time, 1,000's actually really low, you know, and it's not that hard to find 1,000 people that will be your crowd, that will support you and love what you do.
Right. Right. I think a big part of that is authenticity. I think you find your people when you stop looking for them. Yes. You know, like, I don't know. I think as a creative person, when I look at like social media following, it's interesting to see like the engagement. Like, I'm definitely a quality over quantity person. You know, I kind of relish in the fact that my social media followings are completely organic, you know, and I think that's one huge thing that as a professional artist, it's so easy to fall into that trap of figuring out how to like get more followers, when really the people who love you will follow you. And at the end of the day, you might have 5,000 followers opposed to 50,000 followers, but you know that every follower is genuine, and they know that you're genuine and that you're sharing yourself in a genuine way. So
I love that you said that.
That's such a balancing act.
Yeah, I love that you said that. It's the rat race of it, the comparison, you know? I don't know if you fall into this trap too, but it's so easy to go and like, you know, I start comparing myself to other YouTubers. I'm like, oh my gosh, they've got 100,000 subscribers and I only have this many, and I've been doing this so much longer, and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, I have to step back and go, I love what I do, and it's okay that I have less, because I've loved making those videos the way I wanted to make them. You know?
Right. Yeah. Right. Oh, yeah, I totally respect that. I think, I wish I could like even put into words how much I respect what you're saying right now, because I feel so much the same way about like just being true to yourself and your brand. And it's okay to be professional in your branding, but you can also be authentic in, you know, how you carry yourself. And I think that really shows through when you're like, it shows to your followers. It's easy, like I don't know, it's like a hive mind that can see through transparency so quickly.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in authenticity. You know,
and
because I think it's important.
Yeah,
when your work is so derived from who you are, that it's like, what are you selling if you're not showing yourself and your, I don't know.
Well, it's like
I could like sum it up better.
Like showing the not so good stuff along with the good stuff, you know, like sometimes I'll shoot a picture of me, you know, no makeup, tired Monday, kind of like how I'm looking today, and you know, just put it up there, because it's like, hey, the reality is I put on makeup maybe twice a week to shoot the intros to my videos. This is me on a daily basis. On a normal day. It's not all glamorous and, you know, eyeshadow and stuff. And it's one of those funny things, I think, putting up the good with the bad, and it's not just all like, here's this free quilt pattern and here's this other thing to go watch. You know, it's like, you know, here's this bee sting I just got and it's awful and I can't use my sewing machine now, you know, that kind of thing. So I think that's really good. And I think coming from that place where you're willing to share more than just the absolute pretty, you know, gorgeous thing, you know, also willing to show the mistakes and the mess ups and the not pretty stitching, I think that's so important too.
For sure. For sure.
So we don't have much time, but I'd really like to talk about that custom printed fabric real quick. And I'd love to have you on more, because I'm sure we can like talk about this for another 30 minutes. But who are you printing with, and how do you design those? How do you make them?
So that's a question that I get like almost on the daily. And people have said like, oh, will you teach a class on printing fabric? So I want to answer that, because I feel like that's probably the question that I'll get after this podcast goes live. And so here are the caveats with custom printed fabric. It is very expensive. It is not easy. Those are pretty much the two things that make it really hard for me to share that part of my creative process, because when I design fabric, I use everything from paper, pencil, my iPad with my Apple Pencil, Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, crayons. Like, I use so many different mediums to get my final design before I print it, that it's really hard for me to say, okay, let me teach a class where you're going to need Photoshop and Illustrator and an iPad and know how to do custom lettering and know how to do this and this and this and this. And then when you finally get your design, it's going to cost you more than it would in time to like applicate that same thing, you know? So I don't know. It's kind of a double-edged sword, but I think it's also something that is so cutting-edge technology that I hope that it gets cheaper over time. I really should do the math on what it costs, but because I know it's not cheap. It's around $25 a yard to have it printed. So I don't know, but I think for me, it's worth it because I'm not a piecer. Like, anyone who knows me, I try to like post stuff online. Like those are like my, like you say, like post the good and the bad. Usually when I'm posting my piecing work is when I'm like pointing out that I'm very, very human and not good at things. It's usually my piecing. But I found that as an artist, because I was just transferring my drawings from paper and pencil to fabric and thread, printing just made the most sense instead of learning how to raw edge applique or learning how to needle turn applique. It just made more sense to find printers where instead of spending all the time making a quilt top that I think is ugly because the technique is so terrible, I would rather just pay a company to print it out for me and take it right to my quilting machine. So I don't know. It's such a double-edged sword doing custom printing, but it really is so addictive as well once you kind of understand, you know, formatting your designs and resolution, and it's really quite technical. But if anyone feels up to the task to get into it, there's a lot of great companies that basically you send them your design and a really pretty penny, and they'll print the fabric for you. There's a Utah local company that I mean, they ship all over the world and stuff, but they're also in Utah, so I like them because their turnaround time is so fast for me. And that company is called Modern Yardage. So they're super great, especially because they can print up to 56 inches wide, which is really nice if you don't want to piece like a seam within your quilt top design. I don't know how anyone on earth knows how to like line up their designs when they, like, you know, when you have a backing fabric with a large print and you try to line up the design with that seam. I don't know how anyone can actually do that. It's like witchcraft to me in a good way. Like, it's a skill that I wish I had, but I don't. So to me, it's still magical. So Modern Yardage is great because they can do up to 56 inches wide, which is a pretty decent sized quilt top. And then you can add borders and do easy 90-degree piecing like I do. And then another company that I'm sure everyone has heard of is Spoonflower, which the nice thing about them, they only print 42 inches wide, I think, like a standard width of fabric. But they have lots of different substrates, which can be fun. So like if you're a garment sewer, or if you want to try printing on silk, or if you want to try printing straight to canvas and making a wall hanging, they're really nice for that. I don't know. I'm pretty sure Modern Yardage just sticks to quilting cotton, or at least that's all I've ever used them for. And yeah.
And can anyone upload to Modern Yardage, or are they selective? Can anyone do that? Because Spoonflower, you can create an account. Anyone can do that, but I wasn't sure about Modern Yardage.
I think Modern Yardage more specialized. Like, they have specific fabric designers that do lines of fabric. So I think most of their, and don't quote me because I don't know, I don't work for them. They're not paying me to promote them or anything. This is just my experience with them. And they've been really great to me throughout the last few years that I've been using them. But like I said, if you have specific questions, you can clear them up with them as well. But usually when I print with Modern Yardage, I just email like the owner of the company and she prints it for me, because I don't think they do as much custom printing as they do printing the fabric from their designers, their in-house designers. or they're freelance designers, I guess, that they use. Whereas, yeah, with Spoonflower, anyone can upload anything and print it. And so there's drawbacks to each one. It just kind of depends on what you want your quilt top to look like finished. So I don't know. I wish I could afford a large format printer and do it myself, but they're like $50,000.
Yeah, they are quite expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I played around with Spoonflower too. I love the style of your panels, and definitely everybody go check out Karlee's website, KarleePorter.com, and you can see her panels. My favorite is the one that's like the Dream Big panel. It says, if you can dream big enough, anything is possible. And then, just kidding, get back to work.
Yeah.
That is so my slogan. I'm always telling my son something like that.
Yeah, it's fun. I think because I learned how to quilt before I learned how to piece, I don't know if I'll ever call myself a piecer, because knowing what I know digitally, like going to art school and learning all of the program-based art forms, it's nice to just say, like, print this out for me and I'll quilt it. So I'm actually I just finished a quilt for Houston International Quilt Competition that was a custom printed piece of fabric. So
Wow.
I'll have a blog post out on that soon. And the other thing that I love about printing fabric and just technology in general, this makes it amazing, is if I mess up my quilt top, I can just print out another one. Or if I want to redo that quilt, I can just print out another one. I don't have to remake a whole quilt top. I love that so much. So, and it's nice because I can share those with other people. If other people like my quilt top, they can just order one from my website and I'll print one out for them.
I think that's excellent. That is wonderful. Yeah. And that gives your students so many opportunities to play as well. I think that's great. So this is always the last question I ask. I'm wondering, you've got so much going on. You got a little baby on the way. What are you most excited about and looking forward to in the next 5 years?
5 years. Oh, like I said, I don't plan ahead very well. Hopefully I'll be done having kids in 5 years. I would love to have like another 5 kids, but be done in 5 years. I could just have a litter. That would be ideal. I don't know. I think in the grand scheme of my life, I guess you probably get this all the time too, so I feel comfortable saying my age because people probably think that you're a lot younger than you are. Because I get that too. The first time I went to Houston when I was 18 at the quilt show, this lady said, "Where's your mom?"
Oh my gosh.
I said, "She's in Utah. Where's your mom?" But, so in 5 years, I'll be, okay, I won't give you an exact, but I'll be close to 30. I'll be close to 30, mid-30s or early 30s. I don't know. That's such a loaded question, and now I feel like I'm just babbling to put off my answer.
It's a long period of time, and you've got so much going on. It's understandable, but I wish you the best of luck with all of it, especially your business, your graffiti quilting, your printing your panels, and your little girl. It's a little girl, right? It's on the way?
A boy.
Oh, it's a little boy. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Yeah. Well, congratulations on all of that. And let everybody know where they can find you online so they can come and check out your work.
All right. Well, you can most easily find me at KarleePorter.com. And then my 2 main social media accounts are Facebook and Instagram. And Facebook is Karlee Porter Design, and Instagram is Karlee Porter Design. So,
excellent.
Pretty accessible.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and I hope to be on again soon. We can just keep on chatting forever and ever about all this quilting stuff.
Definitely.
So that's it for this episode. If you'd like to find more episodes of the Hello My Quilting Friends podcast, check it out at leahday.com/podcast. We have a player that will play through all of the episodes shared so far, so you can binge listen for hours on end. Until next time, let's go quilt.